This is 9/11 Freefall.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of 9/11 Freefall. My name is Andy Steele, and I am the host. We're going to be joined by Richard Gage, AIA, Ted Walter, and Bob McIlvaine to talk about the Bobby McIlvaine World Trade Center Investigation Act. This is legislation that's been written up for you to take to your member of Congress or your senator and ask them to introduce it. It provides the framework to impanel a new investigation into the destruction of the three buildings that fell in New York on September 11th. The work's already been done for them. They just need to introduce it, and you need to go find that member of Congress willing to do that. So we're going to be talking about that in more depth tonight. And a lot of our anniversary activities are going to be centered around this. In fact, they're going to be speaking at the National Press Club on September 11th about it. Richard Gage, Bob McIlvaine, and Peter Ketchum is going to be there too, former NIST employee. It's already on the National Press Club's website. So we're going to be letting you know how you can be part of that. And even if you can't make it to D.C., we're not going to just introduce the Bobby McIlvaine Act and let it go after the anniversary. We're going to be continuing this throughout the year, sending our volunteers to Congress's offices and telling them that they need to get behind this, that this matter is not closed, that we need a new investigation. Here it is. We need you to introduce it. And we're going to be helping our volunteers do that. We'll tell you how you can get involved. Now, a lot of people are asking us details about what's going on around the anniversary. We sent out a bulletin last week, and there was another one that went out this week. I'm going to go over one of those bulletins with you in case you're eager to hear more right now. They go into more depth during the interview. But the bulletin's title is A Big September, WTC7 Study, Bobby McIlvaine Act, and more. And it begins, the fall of 2017 is set to become a before and after moment in the ongoing efforts of AE 9/11 Truth to educate the world and bring about a new World Trade Center investigation. That's because over the course of the next 2 months, Dr. Leroy Hulsey will be releasing the findings of his 2-year computer modeling study on the collapse of World Trade Center Building 7. At the same time, we will use his report as a vehicle both to intensify our pressure on Congress to open a new investigation and to finally hold NIST accountable for its fraudulent account of the World Trade Center destruction. Here's the plan. On September 6, 2017, at 8 p.m. Eastern, Dr. Hulsey will present from the University of Alaska Fairbanks' Scheibel Auditorium on the findings and conclusions detailed in his team's September 2017 progress report, which will be issued the same day. The presentation will be live streamed so that viewers across the country and around the world can watch. Though originally scheduled for release in August, a draft report of the study is now on course to be issued in mid-October. A 6-week public comment period will follow the release of the draft report, allowing for input from the public and the engineering community. The final report, which will incorporate constructive comments and will be vetted by peer reviewers, will then be published in early 2018. Following on the heels of Dr. Hulsey's presentation, Bob McIlvaine, Peter Ketchum, and Richard Gage will unveil the Bobby McIlvaine World Trade Center Investigation Act at 1 p.m. Eastern on September 11th, 2017 at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. Later that day and over the next 2 days, we will hand-deliver the Bobby McIlvaine package to all 535 members of Congress. The Bobby McIlvaine Act, named after Bob McIlvaine's son, who was tragically killed on 9/11 while entering the North Tower, would impanel a select committee in either chamber of Congress to reinvestigate the World Trade Center destruction. Our goal over the next year and beyond, if necessary, will be to find one or more members of Congress to introduce the bill. To be successful in this effort, we will need your help, so stay tuned for info on congressional outreach. And you're going to get more of that info here tonight. So with that said and laid out for you, we're going to dive further into it in the interview I'm about to play for you. That's going to be coming your way in just a few moments.
The views expressed on this show by guests and the host on issues outside of the 9/11 controlled demolition evidence are the opinions of those individuals alone and do not necessarily reflect those of architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth.
All right, I'm joined today by three people who have been working for the past several years to get what we've all been looking for, a large part of this audience, a new investigation into the destruction of the World Trade Center towers. The evidence has been compiled for a long time, and right now I think the case is proven. We just need a full acknowledgement of it from our official bodies, mainly the U.S. Congress, that this is what happened, at least looking into it. So we're going to be talking to these people today. We've got a great new initiative here at AE 9/11 Truth, a lot of events going on around the anniversary time, and we're going to need your help out there to make this new initiative happen. Our first guest today is Richard Gage, AIA. He's a San Francisco Bay Area architect of 30 years. He's a member of the American Institute of Architects, and, of course, he's the founder and CEO of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, a 501c3 educational charity, driving force behind a lot of the awakening that's happened over the past decade regarding the evidence proving that the three buildings in New York were brought down in controlled demolitions. Richard, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much, Andy. It's always an honor to be with you here.
Our second guest is Ted Walter. He's the Director of Strategy and Development here at AE 9/11 Truth. He's worked on numerous 9/11-related campaigns, including the Remember Building 7 campaign, the High Rise Safety Initiative. He's also the lead author of the book Beyond Misinformation. We reference that book probably all the time. I mean, at least every other week here on this show. Great literature to hand out to members of Congress, others that you're trying to do outreach to. So, Ted, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Andy. It's always great to be on.
And last but not least is Bob McIlvaine. Bob is a 9/11 family member. His son Bobby died entering the North Tower on September 11th. For years, he's been a tireless crusader for the mission of achieving a new investigation. Bob, it's great to have you back.
Thanks, Andy.
All right, so I'm going to start off with Bob here because we have a new piece of legislation. We're going to be talking about how we're going to get this introduced into the Congress. But the name of it is the Bobby McIlvaine World Trade Center Investigation Act, of course, named for Bob's son, Bobby. For anybody who may not know about Bob, who may not know about his son, who died that day. Bob, I want you to tell us about, first yourself a little bit, and then about Bobby, who he was, and his story.
Well, there's not much to talk about me. I mean, I've been involved in this since 9/11 happened. And, when I first started this, I was part of the anti-war campaign. I just couldn't see all this happening just because of what happened on 9/11. Then eventually, after the 9/11 commission hearings, which I thought were a joke, I just totally involved myself in 9/11 and finding the truth. And so that's what I've been doing for 16 years. And as far as Bobby's concerned, Bobby was a graduate of Princeton University. Well, we're from Orland, Pennsylvania, by the way. And Bobby was born in Orland and graduated Upper Dublin High School, then went to Princeton University, graduated in 93. And he went to Princeton, majored in literature and African American studies, or English and African American studies. He wanted to be a writer. He really was a gifted writer. He was a gifted kid, good athlete. And so he graduated Princeton. He got his first job in public relations up in New York. And then from there went to Merrill Lynch. He got an offer to become assistant vice president of media relations because of his writing skills. And he was going to go to either Penn or Harvard graduate school in business. But I think, he definitely wanted to be a writer, but of course he had to make money, especially moving up into New York City. So he moved up to New York City immediately after 9/11 or graduation, and was doing great. So he started Merrill Lynch like 3 weeks. I think it was 2 weeks before 9/11, and then that day happened, and it was just overwhelming. So to get to the point where we are now, it's taken years, and I'm not going to go into that whole story, but and again, going back to the 9/11 Commission here, and after I left there, it was just an absolute joke to me that these people were putting out a book and telling us what happened that day. So I spent my whole time, I read a lot of history. I just do everything as far as trying to find out why Bobby was killed, who killed him, and of course the A&E. And this has really convinced my wife also. It's very, very difficult for me to be doing what I'm doing, but the science of it really was so convincing to her, and it is convincing to me because eventually I had the guts to go up to New York City. I talked to the coroner, and everything sort of fit into place of how he died. And the whole story revolves, he was coming down from 66th Street, got off the subway, started walking to the towers. Now, his office was across the street from the towers, but they had a meeting up there on the 106th floor. But I talked to someone from Merrill Lynch. Stopped walking down there from the train, stopped to get coffee, walked out and got knocked back by the explosion in the towers. So my whole thing is, and it makes it easy on me too, because I don't have to deal with 9/11 family members, because that's very difficult, because they, so many of them just don't want to hear anything about 9/11. And when I come out and tell my story about 9/11, sometimes they get upset. But if I'm only talking about Bobby, he died instantly walking into the towers. So my whole story goes from there. How did he die that quickly? And everything emanates from there now. And it just makes it so much easier. It's so concrete. And I want everybody to understand, he didn't die. He was murdered. He died instantly. And that's where I am as far as 9/11. And the science of it just makes it so easy. When I talk to 9/11 family members, I think maybe I've talked to 2 9/11 family members since 9/11, about that actual day and what happened at that moment when the planes hit and the explosions that were going through. So it's really difficult because, 9/11 family members don't want to talk about it. Friends don't want to talk about it. But, that's the way I live now. And it's all about trying to prove to people that the way it happened, the official story, is just totally bogus. So basically that's it.
Well, we all experienced 9/11 in our own way from wherever we were in the world. We watched it on television, and we were horrified by what we were seeing, and then you add the extra level of having lost a family member, your son, on that day, and to be able to pick up this crusade afterwards, because a lot of times people, when they experience such a tragedy, want to put it behind them. They want to move forward into the future, don't even want to think about it. So the fact that you have taken on this mission and continued all these years, I think, is commendable. It must be very difficult. And to see the whitewash that was the 9/11 Commission, it's documented in from so many different sources on the internet and other places. The fact that they didn't even really want to investigate this horrible crime from the beginning. It took rallying from 9/11 family members to make it happen. Just shows the kind of resistance that we've been up against for so long. And in preparing for this interview, I found this article from Montgomery News. Upper Dublin remembers 9/11 victim Bobby McIlvaine, and the principal from his high school said this about him. He said, well, he was no doubt a very intelligent young man here at UD. He was known more as a caring individual with a very strong work ethic both inside and outside of the classroom. And to me, that is the most important quality that anybody can have, no matter how smart they are or what they do for a living eventually. The important thing is to be a good person. And everything I've read about Bobby shows that he was a very good person. And it's definitely somebody that the 9/11 Truth Movement can remember and rally behind as we try to push this over the edge here, try to get a new investigation going. Ted, now we've got this new act coming out. I'm going to let you share it with the audience. Tell us what the Bobby McIlvaine World Trade Center Investigation Act is.
Sure. So the Bobby McIlvaine World Trade Center Investigation Act is a fairly simple piece of legislation that we at Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth drafted, and that we consulted with Bob and getting his buy-in and his support in putting this legislation forward in the name of his son. It's fairly simple in that what it does is empanel a select committee in either chamber of Congress to conduct an investigation specifically into the collapse of the World Trade Center towers, all three buildings, 1, 2, and 7, and then issue a report with the committee's findings. And there are some specific requirements that we did draft into the legislation. We do ask the committee to look specifically at the findings of NIST and to give a sort of an evaluation of the validity or lack thereof NIST's findings. We also do ask the committee, the legislation calls upon the committee to make sure that as the committee is, having people testify and interviewing people, that people are interviewed who do testify, who are basically presenting evidence that does support the theory that the towers were brought down by controlled demolition. The idea there is to safeguard to some extent the direction which this investigation would take. I think if we get to a situation where this legislation is being introduced and then eventually passed by either chamber, I think we would be in a situation where, by and large, there would be serious pressure for the committee to conduct a genuine investigation, and have the right people testify before the committee. But nonetheless, we felt that it was important to safeguard the process to some extent, and to have the legislation require that the committee, have those sorts of experts testify. Because it's a resolution and because it's a select committee within either chamber of the Congress, it doesn't have to be passed by the other chamber. It doesn't have to be signed by the president. It's something that simply one chamber can take on. And, we've seen numerous examples of these kinds of committees over the years, these committees that are, put into place for a specific purpose, that are basically temporary. Recently you had the Benghazi Committee, for example, or maybe a few different iterations of Benghazi committees investigating that incident. If you go back to the 1970s, you had the Church Committee, which was investigating, CIA conduct throughout the world. You had House Select Committee on Assassinations, which was looking into the assassinations of JFK and MLK and so on. So this is just another example of that kind of committee. What we're doing here at Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth is essentially taking our efforts to the next level. As probably most of the listeners know, this organization has been around now for about 11 years, and the foundation of the organization is having a petition that calls upon Congress to open a new investigation, and that is now signed by almost 3,000 architects and engineers. And so we wanted to take one step further at this point in time, 16 years after the event, where we feel that we have all this evidence that has been assembled and that clearly demonstrates what happened, and that the way to, at this point, get progress at the federal level and get a new investigation is to give them the legislation and give supporters around the country and around the world something very specific and concrete to rally behind. And so we're essentially going to members of Congress and saying, this is the Bobby McIlvaine Act. Do you support it or do you not? And so it's going to be our mission over the next several months or the next year to find one or more members of Congress who are willing to introduce this legislation and push for it to be passed.
And I think some of the things that you said there really need to be pulled out and highlighted. For one, it does require them to actually look into the possibility that explosives were used to bring these towers down, so that they're not just dragging NIST back out in front of the Congress to give the same talking points and close it up. So that is one way that is going to be different from the original investigation. And Ted also pointed out the fact that for years we've been asking for a new investigation, hoping that a congressman would take the work up to draft that legislation and go over all the fine points that it takes to make such a thing and introduce it. Well, now we've done their work for them. We just need one congressman to introduce that. So now we have an actual piece of legislation to give them. All they have to do is just take that final step. And it makes it harder to say no, because you either support it or you do not. You either stand with Bob and all of the other Americans that have questions about September 11th, or you don't. So I think that kind of approach is very good. Richard, in your view, why do you think the time has come for this act to be introduced?
Well, other than the fact that it's been 16 years of cover-up and censorship by the government and the media, as well as the American Institute of Architects and the American Society of Civil Engineers, who have not even told their members about the third tower that came down on 9/11, such that most architects and engineers throughout the world are not even aware that the third worst failure in modern history of a modern structure has occurred by normal office fires, according to NIST, which have never brought down a high-rise. And we've had several notable examples since 9/11, and none before of 100 examples have caused a collapse. So we start with Building 7 at 9/11 Truth because the evidence is so clear for its controlled demolition, i.e. a free-fall acceleration straight down uniformly into its own footprint in under 7 seconds after witnesses hear explosions. And then we go into the towers when we have an open mind. And so this act is very timely because we've been building a base for it, a foundation over the last 11 years, as Ted mentioned, of our organization's mission, which is to get a new investigation. We have indeed gone to Congress several times when we reached 1,000 petition signers, then 2,000, but this is different. Now we have an actual legislation which forces Congress to properly investigate this. This is the time right now to take this legislation in, find that open-minded congressperson, and with enough pressure from our supporters, each of whom we're expecting to go with this legislation to their member of Congress locally and or in Washington, D.C. At the events that we have coming up this September 11th and 12th and before and after, which we'll get into. It is right that public awareness is increasing and more open-minded when you actually look at the explosive evidence in the Twin Towers, including the explosions that are going off 20, 40, 60 stories down below the point of jet plane impacts, the hundreds of witnesses of explosions going off, the molten iron pouring out of the South Tower and seen by structural engineers throughout the towers, and the first responders flowing like lava. They describe a little river of steel, says the World Trade Center structural engineer Leslie Robertson himself. And the finding of nanothermite, a high-tech form of an incendiary used only in very high-tech circles of the military, almost classified, and yet it's found in all the World Trade Center dust samples and documented as residue of that found by the U.S. Geological Survey in these iron microspheres found throughout the World Trade Center dust. So I could go on and on about the evidence, but the important point is that we have it and that it convinces 95% of all architects and engineers who look at it. And that's why we now have, not 1,000, not 2,000, but nearly 3,000 architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth for a new investigation, calling for that, backing up this legislation. And that's what we're going to take into Congress on September 11th with this major effort as we deliver it, hand deliver the act, the evidence, and the backup materials, including a powerful study that we're going to be talking about today by the University of Alaska, to every member of Congress, and we're very excited about this.
Well, I'm excited about it too, obviously, and I'm very hopeful. A few weeks ago on the show, I played clips from our congressman being asked questions on television about the World Trade Center evidence, mostly around Building 7. And obviously there were some congressmen that were dismissive, but there were other ones that were very good in their answers. And what I think has caused a problem in many senses with outreach to Congress is lack of education about the issue and a failure to point out the reasonableness of our cause. People in Congress, of course, have a lot to deal with. There's many issues going on in America every single day that are at the forefront of their thoughts. Their exposure to the issue has been through the corporate media, which has portrayed people who talk about this topic in a very negative light. They mix in outside things that are completely unrelated or just completely fabricated to try to muddy the waters. Basically, the Congress people are people, just like anybody else, just like Richard, Bob, Ted, myself. They're a person. And, sometimes you have an open-minded person, sometimes you have a closed-minded person. You have to find the open-minded people and point out that we're simply looking for a new investigation into the destruction of these towers to resolve these unresolved issues with the NIST report, and that we really can't move on as a country until we close this chapter in our history and have some kind of acknowledgement of the evidence. And by having a new investigation, you are acknowledging that this evidence is there. So that's how I see it, as being somewhat different. Now, I'm going to ask you, Ted, and I'm going to comment on this in just a moment. You mentioned about the fact that we actually have legislation now to hand them. In what other ways is this going to be different from previous outreaches to Congress?
Well, I think that there's sort of a knee-jerk reaction oftentimes when you start to discuss this issue with people, that it's just a conspiracy theory, like, oh, I heard about that stuff on the internet. And, it's just a very, knee-jerk assumption that it's sort of pseudoscience, or that people are cherry-picking evidence, et cetera, and that it's sort of only a conspiracy mindset that can make somebody come to the conclusion that these buildings were destroyed by controlled demolition. I think that we just completely changed the narrative and changed the perception from the get-go when we basically harness the message of, like, one of the leading spokespeople for a new investigation, Bob McIlvaine, and we asked Bob to be at the forefront of this effort, and for his son to be the symbol of this new investigation and this idea of really getting the truth. So I think 9/11 family members, the foundation of the 9/11 Truth Movement, both Bob and then you had the Jersey Girls, who, because of their campaigning, is why the 9/11 Commission even happened. But over the years, as time goes by, as you mentioned before, some of those family members do have to move on. They do start to burn out, and you do start to get that drop off. But Bob, because he's a fairly unique individual, he is still fighting, and he is with us in this fight, and like being a leader in it. And I think because of that, now is the time where we're really harnessing that message, to make the Congress people really realize what this is all about, and that there's a way for them to tackle this issue. That it's not, that it doesn't have to be perceived immediately, as they're getting involved in conspiracy theories. This is about getting the truth behind the murder of nearly 3,000 people, most of them Americans. So I think that we're completely changing the message here. We also have, and Richard mentioned this before, but as many of the listeners know, but not everybody knows, Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth has been funding a computer modeling study for the last 2 years at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Dr. Leroy Hulsey, who is the chair of that university's civil engineering department, is the principal investigator of this study, and he's going to be releasing this study shortly, or a draft of the report within the next couple months this fall. And we know from the preliminary results that he shared last year and the presentations that he's given over the past year that he has already concluded that there's a zero probability that fire brought down Building 7. And so in the coming months, he's going to be presenting all of his findings. He's done a lot more research since last year, of course. And once we have that report, that's also a game changer. We now have decisive proof based on open, transparent modeling of Building 7 and simulating its behavior that it could not have collapsed due to fire. And that, I think, is going to make a big difference in the minds of both of the public in general, but also people in Congress. And so that's a major driving force and a reason why we are choosing to pursue this strategy now, is that we really have sort of like the ultimate foundation for it. So it's been 16 years, and people have, of course, been appealing to Congress for years to look into this. But I think we're at a stronger point than we ever have been before. And there's a window of time in which, I would say we're in that window now where we're far enough away from it that some people are able to now look at it with a more open mind, but we're not so far away where it wouldn't make a difference if the truth was finally uncovered in terms of on a large-scale difference, changing the way that our country functions, changing our policy, changing our mindset, our cultural foundation. If this came out in the next 5 to 10 years, it's still going to cause a massive shift, and that's ultimately what a lot of this is about. So now is the time to bring forward this initiative before it is too late.
It totally is. And 9/11 was an event that shaped the 21st century. I mean, there was the life on 9/10, and then there was life on 9/11 when you're in the moment, and then 9/12 is pretty much what the 21st century has been. Everything changed. And there aren't many adults right now who can't remember where they were, what they were doing, pretty much every single detail of the day on the day of September 11th, 2001. They may not remember what they did on 9/9 or 9/10, but they remember that day. So an acknowledgement of what really happened, even an investigation into it, would have a huge impact on just about everything. So we are not going to let this go. We're going to keep on pushing. And in regards to how this is going to be different than previous outreaches, is just the hands-on way that we're going to be involved. Anybody that has contacted us wanting to help in the previous year, you're going to be hearing from me again. And we're going to be helping you set up appointments with your member of Congress. We're trying to do it for Washington, D.C., but we're not going to just stop there. We're going to be contacting you. You can contact us if you want to do this. We encourage you to do it. We hope you do it. And we're going to help you set up the appointments, coach you to be able to have the best output from your meeting with your member of Congress. And they're going to be getting it on all fronts. It's going to be coming from every part of America. We're going to try to have a volunteer in a congressional office, at least 2 a week, going on all of the time. This is not going to just go away after September 11th. This is going to continue beyond, because this is now the act that they need to get behind, the members of Congress. The work's been done for them. They just got to introduce it. Bob, we talked about earlier, a lot of family members have put this behind them, wanting to move on. I can understand that. What keeps you going? And also, part B of this question, I just want to get your thoughts on this act and address members of Congress who may happen to listen to this podcast.
Well, what keeps me going is my son was murdered, and I don't know what it is now. It's just I don't think I can live without it, and I think it's made me such a better person. It's I almost feel I don't deserve to be happy. I don't deserve to be taking trips around the world and having fun. And this is very difficult on my wife, but it's a crucial part of history. And I think the main thing that's helped me is that's all I do is read history. I've spent a month and a half on World War I, and it's amazing how interrelated the whole century is. This idea of war. We've had war constantly, and that's all related to 9/11. And then the aftermath of 9/11, and people somehow, some way, must get this, that we can stop wars. I've really taken it beyond 9/11. I mean, I certainly, I want people to know who murdered my son, but this stuff has been going on forever, specifically in the last century. So I just, I feel better about myself, and I'm not going to call it closure. But I feel that I've made myself so much a better person. The fact that I can look at World War I, I can, I go back into the 1800s, go back to Wellington and Napoleon, and how money supported that. It just goes on and on and on. Everybody keeps getting richer, and certainly from the 9/11. Look at all the people who died because of 9/11. I went out and marched against it. I got arrested in Washington. I thought, God, maybe I can make a difference. And I still feel that somehow, some way, I'm going to make a difference. But if I don't, I still feel good about myself. But the idea that we went to war and millions of people have died, and it just goes on and on and on. And I understand how difficult it is for people to jump into this because, they get fired from their jobs. You lose your friends. I don't have any friends. I have a lot of people that call me friends, but they don't want to talk to me. My wife doesn't want to go out with me because she's scared to death I'm going to talk about 9/11, which I don't. If someone asks me, I will talk about it, but then she's afraid of that. And my wife supports me, so it's my son. He doesn't want to. He's a teacher. He can't be talking about 9/11 in the school because he'll get fired. So it's very difficult, and people just don't feel or don't want to know or think about their country being evil, if you think about it, and they just don't want to go there. And that's where history comes in. It's a century of evilness. So many lives. When we were talking, close to 100 million people have died since 1900. So it's just unbelievable. So what's happening now, it's just another step for me that maybe some way we're going to get this out in the public eye. And the science of it is so concrete. Again, it turned my wife 2 years ago when she heard Richard speak that, of course they're brought down by controlled demolition. And, of course, the next step from there is, well, then who brought the buildings down? And I think people can spend a little time and figure it out themselves. And it's very admirable that everyone sticks to this because that's so concrete. And that, to me, the fact that if you had a couple congressmen, I really believe if anyone sat down and started reading about it, they're going to know for sure that they were brought down by controlled demolition. And then, of course, the next question is, who did it? And if that starts spreading throughout Congress, it'll start spreading throughout the United States. And, of course, the media has to jump on this. And that's basically what the biggest problem is. I mean, can I just tell this story real fast of what happened in 2011 with the media? I think I've told it. I don't know if I've told it to you, Andy, but 2011 when bin Laden was supposedly taken out, I had, Philadelphia Inquirer called me, the Daily News of Philadelphia called me, and, I had BBC. I had all sorts of papers calling me, but specifically Philadelphia, the one from Philadelphia, she was a, good reporter, and she asked about, what happened that day with bin Laden, and I said, well, don't trust me, but look at newspapers around the world stating that bin Laden had died in 2001. And she said, no, you got to, I said, well, no, again, don't take it from me. It's around the world. They were talking about it. And so, we had talked about Bobby, what happened that day. Then I spoke about that. And about 3 days later, she calls me back and says the editors will not allow that. They basically want to hear from 9/11 family members who want to put bin Laden in hell. Just good. They caught him. They should have shot him. Hopefully this, will bring closure for me. Then I had the Daily News, a woman called me, and she had gone to school or came from Upper Dillon. She wasn't in Bobby's class. And again, I gave that same story. And this is the honest to God truth. She said the Pentagon would never allow that to go into the paper. So, when the media, it's so controlling, and people feel what the media's not talking about, it can't be true. So the fact that possibly we can get congressmen to talk about it, then you're going to get the media coverage, you're going to get TV coverage from it. And that'll be the big thing, because the media has to be broken. It has to be, we got to get into the media somehow, some way. Because, there's two perfect examples where two major newspapers would not touch it. One says the Pentagon, and the other says the editors wouldn't allow it. They wouldn't allow it. BBC were coming over to see me in New York, and I told them what I wanted to talk about. They cut that off immediately. So, and there's quite a few papers that just cut it off. They just wanted to hear a human interest story that I was against the war and things of that sort. But so that's why I'm excited about what Richard and A&E is doing right now, because the idea that you can get a congressman involved in it, or a couple congressmen, and again, I think if it gets out into the media, that'll be the big thing, and especially if it gets on TV. And if you have someone, so people will start believing, geez, maybe this is what really happened. And then, of course, hopefully we get change in the world, this type of thing. So.
Yeah, and it's a tragedy that in a supposedly free country, people have to be worried about being fired for sharing their mind on political events or world events. And I don't think this is good. I think that we need to be more open. We should be more allowed. We have a First Amendment, but culturally we should be more allowed to talk about these things. And I think this act and getting a congressman behind it will put a big hole in that wall. Now, I want to get to Richard in just a moment, talking about how our supporters can help out. But first, we get a lot of questions about what's going on September 11th and what our presence is going to be. at Washington, D.C. So, Ted, can you lay out the details? What's going on September 11th and the 12th this year?
Sure. So we have quite a few things going on around the anniversary, but specifically in Washington, D.C., we will be there on September 11th. We're starting with a news conference at the National Press Club, which is happening at 1 p.m., and Bob is going to be there. Richard is going to be there. We're also going to be joined by Peter Michael Ketchum, who, as many people know, is the former NIST employee who, over the past year, has begun speaking out against his former agency's reports on the World Trade Center collapses. He started doing his research about a year ago in the summer and quickly came to the conclusion that NIST investigation was a cover-up, and he felt compelled to do something about it. And so he's been a major part of our work over the past year. We released a short documentary. It's a half-an-hour interview with him back in March, which has been very well received. And I think it's a great piece to share with people who are a little more on the fence or, have had trouble approaching the issue because he's somebody who really, sort of believed the official story for 15 years. And, he talks a lot about his own process of coming to the realization. And he's a very eloquent person and speaker as well. So in any case, Peter is going to be joining us there as well. And after the news conference, which will probably last, half an hour to an hour, we're going to go down to the Capitol building and begin dropping off the Bobby McIlvaine Act, which is going to be sort of in a package, the Bobby McIlvaine package, over, in the late afternoon on the 11th and all day on September 12th. We're basically going to be dropping off this package with every member of Congress. So that's 535 members of Congress. We'll probably hit a small number the first day late in the afternoon. We're going to get to the Capitol building at about 3:30. So if people are not able to come to the press conference, but they are able to come to help us out at the Capitol, that's where we need a lot of volunteers. You can meet us basically in front of the Capitol building at 3:30. And we'll be there, and we'll be going into the building by 4:00 and handing out the legislation everywhere that we can. We're also trying to schedule appointments with members of Congress. So I know Bob's congressperson. We have been in touch with his office, and we are trying to get that meeting scheduled on the 11th, probably around in the late afternoon, and then as many Congress people as we can hit the next day as well. And, of course, Richard is going to be there. So, if you're somebody that wants to come out and help, contact us by emailing us at congress@ae911truth.org. Again, that's congress@ae911truth.org. And we can actually assist you in setting up an appointment with your congressperson. Usually they're very happy to meet with people. So there's a good chance that we can get a meeting. And then Richard can basically accompany you and give a 5 or 10 minute presentation of the evidence and, really get your congressperson thinking and hopefully supporting the Bobby McIlvaine Act. So that's the goal for those 2 days. And, again, we invite you to come and help us fill the room at the National Press Club. And then we really need your help over at the Capitol late in the afternoon on the 11th and into the 12th. Prior to the 11th, coming up next Wednesday, September 6th, Dr. Leroy Hulsey, who's, as I mentioned, the professor who's doing the study on the collapse of Building 7, is going to be giving a presentation from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. It's going to be live streamed on the university's website, and we're going to be sending out a link so that people can watch that presentation live. We'll be sending that link out this coming Friday, so September 1st, and it'll be posted on our website as well, so visit our website if you're looking for it. And tune in next Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific time to watch Leroy Hulsey's presentation. And, of course, we will make the video available shortly after that. Dr. Hulsey obviously has given a series of presentations over the past year. He gave a great presentation last year at the Justice in Focus Conference. And so he's got a lot to report on all the analyses that he has been doing, he and his team have been doing over the past year. And they're pretty much done with the study. They're going to be releasing the draft report in a couple months. So what you'll be getting next week is essentially a summary of all of their findings and conclusions. which is basically a prequel to the draft report actually coming out. And Dr. Hulsey decided to do a draft report rather than just releasing a final report, so that we can have the public at large and the engineering community actually read the report and submit comments and maybe spot any flaws or any sort of feedback that we can get from the public and engineers around the world can help make this report even better. Of course, that's something that NIST did as well when they released their draft report for both studies on the towers and Building 7. They had a draft report, and there was a public comment period. Our public comment period is going to be much longer. It's going to be like 6 weeks instead of 3 or 4. We guarantee that we're going to read every comment that comes in, and anything that that has merit that will improve the study and the report, it'll probably be incorporated. So we look forward to releasing the draft report in mid-October and getting your feedback. So those are the two major events: September 6th, Dr. Hulsey's presentation, and then September 11th in D.C. At the National Press Club.
I think it's important to note also that Dr. Hulsey's report is open. It's not a black box like the NIST report that came out with quite dubious input data as well as results that make no sense when you compare it to the actual video footage of the building's collapse. So here, input data, Dr. Hulsey's, is available to comment on. So that is the key difference. The scientific method relies on transparency. So others can build with great confidence on the body of these reports that come out. But there's no confidence in this report because there's no transparency.
Exactly, and Richard is totally right. This is going to be a game changer in my view. I mean, you have two reports, and one has all their input data laid out for everyone to see. The other one keeps it hidden. What would a rational viewer of the situation trust more? I think we all know the answer to that, and that's exactly why this bill needs to come forward right now, because the study exists. It's the backbone of it, and we're going to be able to point to the study and say, here you go, NIST findings don't hold any water. Richard, I want to ask you, how important is the role of our supporters going to be over the following year, and what do you have to say to our many supporters out there who may think, hey, what can I really do? Can I really persuade my member of Congress to introduce this? What power do I really have as an individual?
Yeah, well, we have incredible power when we step up and use it. I mean, look at me, for instance. Here I am, a flag-waving Ronald Reagan Republican in 2006 saying, yeah, let's go to war in Afghanistan, in Iraq, not doing anything about it, but that's my attitude. And wow, I got hit over the head by a 2x4 with this evidence, the very same evidence that this act that we're promoting to Congress and that we're asking our supporters to take to all of their congressional representatives asks them to look at the very same evidence. It has not changed, Andy, in the last 11 years since I got hit over the head with it. And so here we have the opportunity to hold our congresspersons accountable. We're looking for a needle in the haystack. We're looking for one out of 535 congresspersons. And you, the listeners out there, are in every congressional district across this country. And that's why you have the power. Andy asked about what power do you have? Well, we can't act on your behalf. We can't go to your congressman and say, hey, we need an investigation, but you can, and you can give us that authority. So that's the power that you have. All you need to do is email Congress at ae911truth.org, and here we've got Andy ready to help you make that appointment either locally in your district at home, and he'll find an architect or engineer, one of our 2,900, to go with you to that meeting over the next several months. Or if you're near D.C., like Ted mentioned, please come to our press conference at 1 p.m. on September 11th, and get the sense of what's really going on. And then we'll walk right over to Capitol Hill, and we'll go to your congressperson. Preferably, Andy will have helped you to make an appointment beforehand, because the next morning at 10 o'clock on September 12th, Tuesday, we will be spending all day at these appointments. So we need you to contact Andy at Congress at 897truth.org and make those appointments. So we've got to compel with political force, all of us, putting several different pings on our congressperson. They need to hear it from several different sources. That's what's going to move them to say, well, maybe I'll take a stand for the truth. I saw this 15-minute documentary that 9/11 Truth made on World Trade Center 7. Ed Asner, who was narrating, it was very compelling. And I can see that, no, this building did not come down due to ordinary fires. And so I will stick my head out above the rest and help this constituent by introducing this bill. And then we've got some action to take. Then we've got media attention. And we're backed up, as Ted has mentioned, by this incredible $300,000 two-year study by the University of Alaska that proves that the NIST report is fraudulent across from beginning to end. It proves it because he's done all the analysis that show the fire couldn't brought it down, and he's going to do an analysis that shows what could have brought it down. That's what we're going to be taking to Congress. But before that, on Friday night, September 8th, we'll also be showing the film, that very film, with Ed Asner, 15 minutes. We'll be showing Peter Ketchum's incredible film, the NIST whistleblower that Ted mentioned. We'll be showing the 9/11 walking tour of the museum. It's an app that's a 2-hour video. And we'll be showing it outside at Foley Square at 6:30 p.m. in New York City, 7 blocks from World Trade Center. This outdoor film festival will be happening, and I'll be speaking there also, presenting and introducing the Bobby McIlvaine Act and going into some detail about the evidence. And so we're excited about that, but also on Monday night, September 11th, in Roslyn, right next to Washington, D.C., at the Holiday Inn, we have a panel. I'll be there speaking about the evidence, the Bobby McIlvaine Act, the World Trade study, yet again, but there is a lot happening this September, so don't miss out. And it'll be on our website, which is ae911truth.org.
Absolutely. And our outreach isn't only going to be confined to going to members of Congress's offices. We're going to have a website that tells you how you can go to town halls, that you have question and answer sessions. What a great opportunity to throw a 9/11 question at your member of Congress about the Bobby McIlvaine Act, and you get some really good interactions when you do that, as we've learned. You can also write to people through our government outreach page. You know, if you only got a few minutes, you can put in your zip code, your address. It'll generate a letter to your member of Congress. We're going to have that set up. And, they pay attention to that. They take a little tally, I was told by someone who worked on the inside of Washington, of particular issues and what people are saying about them. One of you out there in the audience, one of the supporters, is going to be the person who makes that appointment for that visit, goes and talks to your congressman and persuades him to introduce that act. That is you out there.
I'm wondering, Andy, who that's going to be. I mean, aren't you just really curious? Who is going to be the person that makes that breakthrough? Like you said, we set it up. We laid the foundation. Who's it going to be?
That's what I want to know. Who is going to be the person that persuades their congressman out there to introduce the Bobby McIlvaine Act? I want to meet that person and shake their hand, and it definitely could be you. It could be several of you. It doesn't even have to be just one person. So step forward and answer the call. We hope to see you in D.C., but even if you can't make it, contact us, and we will get you in on this fight. All right, guys, we are at the end of our hour now, so I want to thank you very much for coming on the show, and I look forward to actually seeing you guys in person in Washington, D.C. this year.
Okay, thanks, Andy.
Thanks, Andy.
Thanks so much, Andy.
This program is on every Thursday night on No Lies Radio at 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Pacific. You can also keep track of the archives by going to 911freefall.com. This is Andy Steele saying have a great week and good luck.